In the spring of 1901, the Ohio River receded after a 3-week flood and exposed a graveyard that had no business being there. The bones were too large, the markers were carved in a language nobody recognized, and within 18 months every person who documented it was dead. The official explanation has never once addressed that last part. And before we go further, if you're drawn to cases like this, where the official record doesn't quite add up, subscribe now, because what follows only gets harder to explain. I want to start with a morning that most people have never heard of, May 3rd, 1901. The Ohio River outside Gallipolis has been receding for 6 days. A surveyor named Edmund Hale is walking the exposed bank, working an insurance assessment, counting damaged fences, measuring erosion lines, marking property boundaries that the flood has disrupted. He is not looking for anything unusual. He has no reason to be. The bank is raw, stripped down to underlying layers by 3 weeks of flood pressure and 2 weeks of recession. Topsoil gone. What's left is a cross-section of the earth itself, exposed the way a cut-in skin exposes what's underneath. Hale sees a stone dark grey, rectangular, standing at an angle where the bank face has partially collapsed. Carved on its surface, not scratches, not weathering patterns, not the kind of marking that wind and water produce. Characters, ordered and deliberate. A written language, he doesn't touch it. He sketches it in his survey notebook. The same notebook he uses for fence measurements and erosion calculations. Then he looks further down the bank. There are more stones, evenly spaced, running in a line along the exposed bank for what he later estimates as 200 yards. And below each stone, where the bank face has given way, bone is visible. Protruding from the exposed earth, Hale writes in his notebook that the femur he can see is nearly the length of his entire arm from shoulder to fingertip. He is a surveyor. He measures things for a living. He is not describing something he doesn't understand how to assess. He is describing something he understands precisely and cannot account for. A surveyor doing routine insurance work finds a graveyard exposed by a flood. That detail is the most important thing about this case. He wasn't looking for it. He had no motive to fabricate it. And he documented it in a professional context before anyone could tell him what it meant, or before anyone had the chance to tell him to stop. What that documentation generated is the question this investigation keeps returning to. 3 days later, the situation had changed. Word had reached Gallipolis. By May 6th, a physician named Dr. Carver Elms had arrived at the site with 2 colleagues from the Gallia County Medical Society. They were not archaeologists. They were doctors, men trained in human anatomy whose professional instinct is to examine, measure, and document. What they found is recorded in Dr. Elms's site report, which survived in the Gallia County Historical Society archive until 1938, at which point it was transferred to state custody and has not been located since. But Elms's personal correspondence survives, and the measurements he recorded there are specific, the femur lengths averaging between 34 and 40 inches. A femur of 20 inches corresponds to a person of approximately 6 feet. These remains suggest individuals standing between 9 and 12 feet tall. The bone density was significantly heavier than standard human skeletal material. The cortical walls, in Elms's description, suggesting structural load-bearing capacity beyond anything recorded in anatomical literature at the time. The skull morphology was distinct. Cranial vault elongated posteriorly, jaw structure robust, orbital sockets forward-facing and proportionally human in their placement. Whatever these remains represented, they were bipedal, upright, and structurally related to humans in every anatomical category, just scaled differently, significantly differently. Then there were the stone markers themselves, dark grey stone, uniform composition, not native to the Ohio River Valley. The nearest geological source for material matching this composition is over 300 miles away. Someone quarried stone aimed from a significant distance and transported it to this location for a specific purpose. Dr. Elms had examined human remains for 20 years of medical practice. He wrote that these remains fell outside any variation he had encountered or read about in medical literature. That is not the language of confusion. The cemetery of his old. That is not the language of someone who doesn't know what they're looking at. That is the language of a man who knows exactly what he's looking at, and understands that what he's looking at should not exist. The official designation that would later be applied to this site was Native American burial mound. That designation addresses none of these three contradictions. Not the scale of the remains, not the bone density, not the non-native stone. The official record moved past all three without explanation. This is where the explanation starts to break, and I want your perspective on this. Based on what you've heard so far, does this sound like coincidence or something structured? Let me know in the comments before we go deeper. At some point in this investigation, I stopped looking at the physical evidence and started looking at the human record around it. And what I found there is the part of this case that I have been unable to set aside. Edmund Hale, the surveyor who made the initial discovery on May 3, 1901, died in November of that year, 6 months after his find, cause of death listed as acute cardiac failure. He was 31 years old with no documented prior health issues. Dr. Carver Elms, who led the medical documentation of the site, died in February 1902, 9 months after his visit to the bank, listed as pneumonia. His colleagues described him as being in excellent health at Christmas. I want to walk through the remaining 9 witnesses carefully, because each one individually sounds like ordinary misfortune. The 2 medical colleagues who assisted Elms, one dead by summer 1902, one by winter of the same year. 2 newspaper correspondents who covered the story for the Gallipolis Journal, both dead before the end of 1902. The county land surveyor who formerly recorded the site location, dead in early 1903. Reverend Thomas Hook, the minister who photographed the stone tablets before they were removed, dead March 1903. 4 members of the excavation party, all dead by mid-1903, 11 people, 18 months, cardiac failure, pneumonia, drowning, fever, a farming accident. I want to be precise about what I'm saying here, because precision matters. I'm not claiming these deaths were orchestrated. What I'm saying is this: the statistical probability of 11 healthy adults between the ages of 28 and 47 dying of unrelated causes within 18 months of a single shared event is a number that requires examination. The official record notes each death individually. In county registers, in church records, in newspaper obituaries, nobody in any official capacity has ever looked at them together. That absence of examination is itself significant, and this pattern is not unique to Ohio. The Arkansas River discovery of 1874, a structurally identical case, flood exposure, giant remains, carved stone markers, produced 12 witnesses, all 12 dead within 3 years, all individual causes. Nobody examined the pattern. Once you notice it, it keeps appearing. And the fact that it keeps appearing in cases with this specific profile is something that the official record has consistently failed to address. I want to talk about the speed of what happened next. Because the timeline of institutional response is the detail that reframes everything else, Edmund Hale made his discovery on May 3rd. Local newspaper coverage began May 7th. The Smithsonian Institution's representative, a field anthropologist named Dr. Warren Aldgate, listed in the institution's 1900 personnel directory, arrived at the site on May 12th, 9 days. The Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., dispatched a credentialed field representative to a rural county in southern Ohio 9 days after a local surveyor found something unusual in a receded riverbank. For context, routine archaeological site reports, filed with the Bureau of American Ethnology, in this period typically waited months for institutional response. Some waited years. The Bureau's own correspondence records show average response times of 4 to 8 months for standard discovery reports. 9 days is not a routine response time. 9 days requires a monitoring system that identifies relevant discoveries quickly and a deployment infrastructure that can move credentialed personnel across several hundred miles within less than 2 weeks. 9 days is a prepared response. Aldgate spent 4 days at the site. He photographed the exposed remains. He removed 6 complete skeletons and 14 of the carved stone tablets. He signed receipts for the transferred materials with Dr. Elms and the county land surveyor. He gave assurances that a full excavation team would follow. No excavation team ever arrived. The receipts Aldgate signed are not in any Smithsonian archive. Dr. Warren Aldgate's name appears in the institution's 1900 personnel directory. It does not appear in the 1902 directory. There is no record of his departure, his resignation, or his reassignment to any other posting. and within 4 months of Aldgate's departure, the Riverbank site and surrounding land was purchased by an entity called Ohio Valley Land Reclamation Partners. No other records of this company exist in Ohio business filings. No other land purchases, no tax records, no corporate registration beyond this single transaction. The land was graded, filled, and a grain storage facility built on top within 6 weeks of the purchase. Each of these elements individually, the response time, the missing receipts, the personnel gap, the shell company, each one has a possible innocent explanation. Together they describe something more structured than coincidence. I want to step back from this specific case for a moment and ask a purely practical question. Not who, not why, just how. If an institution needed to systematically remove physical evidence of anomalous skeletal discoveries from the public record, not once in Ohio, but repeatedly, across multiple states and multiple decades, what would that operational system actually look like? I started treating it as a logistics problem. The first stage is early detection, an institution monitoring regional newspaper coverage for specific terminology. Giant, unusual remains, burial, unknown language, could identify relevant discoveries within 48 hours of local publication in 1901. Telegraph communication made national news monitoring operationally straightforward. The 9-day response time in Ohio is entirely consistent with a system that identified the Gallipolis journal coverage within 2 days of publication and deployed within the week. The second stage is rapid field response, a network of credentialed representatives pre-positioned across geographic regions, not a large network, perhaps a dozen individuals covering broad territories, could reach most continental American locations within 4 to 7 days of deployment instruction. The Ohio response fits this model precisely. The third stage is evidence transfer through legitimate authority. A Smithsonian representative arriving with institutional credentials could legally request physical evidence from local officials without generating resistance or suspicion. The transfer gets documented through signed receipts, receipts that exist as official record at the local level, creating apparent transparency while being removable from the institutional archive without leaving a visible gap in the public record. The fourth stage is site elimination through proxy acquisition. A shell company purchasing a site following evidence removal creates a complete break in any institutional fingerprint. There is no documentable connection between the Smithsonian's evidence collection and the subsequent burial of the site under construction. The chain is severed by the intermediary. None of these 4 stages require anything that didn't demonstrably exist as institutional and legal capacity in 1901. The system isn't mysterious, and the Ohio case shows all 4 stages operating in sequence. So does the Arkansas case from 1874. So does the Lovelock Cave discovery in Nevada in 1912. Giant skeletal remains transferred to institutional custody, physical evidence subsequently unlocatable in any accessible collection. The mechanism is achievable, the infrastructure existed, and its operational signature appears across 4 decades in multiple independent cases. That is not coincidence. That is a system functioning as designed. There is one piece of physical evidence from the Ohio case that the system failed to fully reach, and it's the piece that stays with me most. Reverend Thomas Hook photographed 7 of the carved stone tablets before Aldgate removed them. Those photographs were published in the Gallipolis Journal on May 14, 1901. The journal archive for that date is held in the Ohio Historical Society collection. The May 14th issue is physically present. The photographs of the tablets and the accompanying article are not. The pages have been removed, not lost through deterioration, removed. The binding shows clean cuts where the pages were excised, but Hook wrote a letter to his brother on May 20th, 1901, describing the symbols in detail and including hand-drawn reproductions of several characters. That letter is in private family possession. It has been examined by researchers, and the reproductions it contains have been analyzed by people with training in ancient linguistics. The symbols show structural characteristics consistent with Paleo-Hebrew and early Phoenician script families. Not identical to either, but sharing systematic elements that suggest relationship to Proto-Semitic writing traditions. The structural regularities, repeating base forms, directional consistency, systematic variation, are characteristics of a genuine writing system rather than decorative carving. Pre-Columbian contact between Old World writing traditions and North America has documented physical support at multiple sites: the Bat Creek inscription in Tennessee, the Los Lunas Decalogue stone in New Mexico, the Newark Holy Stones in Ohio itself, discovered in 1860. Each of these cases has been disputed. Each has also been supported by serious linguistic analysis. What makes the Ohio tablets different is not the symbols themselves. It is their context, buried under the Ohio River Valley, at a depth suggesting deposition centuries before European contact, in graves containing remains that match no known population, a writing system that predates any documented presence of Old World literate cultures in North America, in graves of beings that fall outside any documented human physical range. The tablets don't resolve anything, but they raise a question about who was literate in the Ohio River Valley before anyone in the official timeline was supposed to be there at all. And that question is one the official record has never once tried to answer. I want to be clear about something before going further. The Ohio discovery was not unique. It was one point in a pattern that ran across the American interior for at least 6 decades. Arkansas, 1874. The flood exposes a graveyard on the banks of the Arkansas River outside Van Buren. Structured burials, giant skeletal remains, carved stone markers in an unrecognized language. A Smithsonian representative arrives and removes the physical evidence. 12 witnesses dead within 3 years. The site is purchased by a shell company and buried under concrete. The Arkansas Gazette articles documenting the discovery are missing from the newspaper archives. Pages cleanly removed from the bound volumes Lovelock Cave, Nevada, 1912. Commercial miners excavating guano from a cave in the Nevada desert find skeletal remains averaging 7 to 8 feet, alongside mummified individuals with hair that field observers described as reddish in color. The materials are transferred to institutional custody. The physical remains are not represented in any currently accessible Smithsonian collection. The only documentation that survives is in the field notes of the miners themselves. Catalina Island, California, 1913. Ralph Glidden's excavation recovers several thousand skeletal remains over a period of years. A portion of these he documents as significantly exceeding normal human scale. Glidden's entire collection was purchased by a private buyer in 1929 and donated to the Smithsonian. The oversized remains are not catalogued in any accessible section of the current collection. 4 cases, 4 different states, 4 different decades, discovery through non-institutional means, rapid institutional response. Physical evidence transferred to Smithsonian custody, evidence subsequently unlocatable, site eliminated or permanently restricted. The official explanation for each case is different. The operational outcome in every case is identical. When the Smithsonian was directly questioned about giant skeleton acquisitions in congressional testimony in 1930, the institution stated that no such remains had ever been received or catalogued. The Bureau of American Ethnology's receiving logs for the relevant periods contain fewer than 20 entries corresponding to the hundreds of documented discovery reports from the same decades, 400 documented reports in newspaper accounts, 20 institutional records, 0 accessible physical evidence. The pattern is not local. It is not coincidental. It operates across a continent, across multiple decades, with a consistency that requires something more than institutional disorganization to explain. I want to end where this investigation started. The Ohio Riverbank. May 3, 1901, Edmund Hale's survey notebook still exists. It is in the possession of his great-grandchildren in Gallia County, Ohio. The sketches of the stone symbols are legible. The measurements are recorded in his professional hand. The date is clear. He documented what he found before anyone could reach him, and 6 months later he was dead at 31 years old. In 2009, an independent research team conducted ground-penetrating radar surveys along the relevant section of the Ohio Riverbank. The surveys returned subsurface anomalies consistent with the burial layout described in Hale's notebook and in Elms's correspondence: rectangular forms, uniform depth, consistent spacing over an extended distance. The surveys were conducted without institutional support. The results were published in a small circulation academic journal. They received no response from mainstream archaeology. No follow-up survey has been conducted. The grain storage facility, built by Ohio Valley Land Reclamation Partners on the graveyard site in 1901, was demolished in 1967. The site is currently a municipal parking area. No archaeological survey was conducted at any point before, during, or after the demolition. If the 6 skeletons and 14 tablets removed by Dr. Aldgate in May 1901 were transferred to the Smithsonian Institution, where are the receiving records, and what section of the archive were they removed from? If the symbols on the tablets show structural relationship to Proto-Semitic writing traditions, what do they say, and who carved them, and when? If the ground-penetrating radar anomalies beneath the former site correspond to the burial layout documented in 1901, what is still there, under the parking area, under the filled earth, where no survey has ever been permitted to look? 11 witnesses documented the Ohio discovery. 11 witnesses died within 18 months. The pattern appears in Arkansas, in Nevada, in California. Always the same sequence, always the same institutional outcome, always the same official silence afterward. Edmund Hale measured a femur on the riverbank that morning. He wrote the number down in his survey notebook. He was a man who measured things for a living, and he knew what the number meant. 6 months later, he was dead at 31 years old. The number is still in the notebook. The notebook is still in Ohio. Nobody has explained that yet. If you want me to continue this investigation into Arkansas, Lovelock, and the missing Smithsonian records, make sure you're subscribed. Because this pattern doesn't end in Ohio, and the next case is even harder to ignore.